The orderly's fist slammed into the supply closet door, 3 inches from my face. Mike had told them where I'd be. Now I'm trapped with stolen vials of the drug they're pumping into Elias, the only proof someone's trying to kill him. The metal tray in my hands is my only weapon. If that door opens, I'm dead. The lock rattles, my breath burns, and the man on the other side isn't just big, he's smiling. The fluorescent hum of the ICU vibrated in Sarah Johnson's teeth, a low-frequency drone that competed with the rhythmic, mechanical hiss of Elias Vance's ventilator. The air in room 402 was thick with the sharp, clinical sting of antiseptic and the faint, underlying scent of ozone from the heavy monitoring equipment. Elias lay motionless, a pale mountain of a man beneath thin, starched sheets. But his eyelids were anything but still. Sarah leaned over the cold steel railing of the bed, her thumb tracing a jagged scratch in the metal. She watched his eyes. The man's pupils darted beneath translucent skin, dancing a frantic, rhythmic jig. 3 rapid blinks, a heavy pause, 3 long, weighted closures, then 3 more quick flutters. "Elias, can you hear me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the whir of the cooling fans. The sequence repeated with mathematical precision. Snap, 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 drag, 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 snap, snap, snap. "SOS," Sarah murmured. Her pulse thudded against her collarbone, a frantic echo of the code. She reached for his hand, expecting the limp, damp weight of a man deep in a drug-induced coma. Instead, his fingers clamped around her wrist with the sudden, terrifying strength of a drowning man. The plastic ID band on her arm dug into her skin, a sharp reminder of the reality of his grip. "I've got you," she breathed, her eyes scanning the room for the red glow of the security camera lens. The heart monitor beeped a steady, mocking green, showing a rhythm that lied to the world. "I see it. I'm getting you out." Elias's eyes rolled toward the ceiling tiles, his jaw working against the thick plastic of the intubation tube. A low, wet gurgle rose from his throat. He blinked again, faster now, a stuttering telegram of pure terror. Sarah fumbled in her scrub pocket for her small leather notebook, her pen scratching jagged lines across the page as she translated the frantic shuddering of his lashes. "Help!" the code screamed. "They're watching," while her mind raced to process the plea. Sarah's hands moved with practiced, clinical efficiency. She wasn't just observing, she was collecting. Her fingers brushed against the IV manifold, where a small, unlabeled bag of clear liquid hung separate from the standard saline. With a quick, fluid motion she had practiced in the shadows of the supply closet, she pulled a concealed syringe from her waistband. She siphoned a sample of the mystery fluid, the plunger sliding back with a faint, oily resistance. The liquid looked like water, but it moved with the heavy viscosity of something predatory. She tucked the vial deep into her pocket, the glass cool against her thigh, just as a heavy shadow fell across the threshold. The door to the room creaked on its hinges, and Mike Davis slid inside. Mike was the lead systems tech, a man who usually smelled of stale coffee and burnt circuitry. But today, he carried the sharp, acidic scent of nervous sweat. He slouched, his greasy hair hanging over his eyes as he looked everywhere but at Sarah. His hands were deep in his pockets, and Sarah could hear the muffled crack, crack, crack of his knuckles. One by one, then the thumbs. "Dr. Sterling wants him moved to the imaging suite," Mike said, his voice a flat, rehearsed monotone. "Now." Sarah didn't move. She kept her body between Mike and the IV stand where the stolen sample had lived seconds ago. "He's not stable for a transfer, Mike. His intracranial pressure is spiking." Mike finally looked up, but his gaze didn't hit her face. He looked at the black dome of the security camera in the corner of the ceiling, then at the one in the hallway. He cracked his neck, a sharp sound like a dry twig snapping. Orders are orders, Sarah. Don't make this a thing. Just help me with the gurney. Why are you checking the feeds, Mike? Sarah asked, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. Mike's eyes darted to the floor. I'm not. The system is glitching. Sterling is on a warpath about data integrity. Just move the patient. The air in the room felt suddenly pressurized, as if the oxygen was being sucked out by the vents. Sarah felt the weight of the stolen vial in her pocket. Mike's jittery movements and his refusal to meet her eyes confirmed the rot she had suspected. He wasn't here to help. He was here to ensure the prototype didn't deviate from the script. I need to grab a fresh bag of saline first, Sarah said, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Stay with him. She didn't wait for an answer. She turned and stepped into the hallway, her pulse racing. She didn't head for the nurse's station. Instead, she ducked into the small, windowless supply closet near the service elevator. The room was a narrow canyon of floor-to-ceiling shelves, packed with gauze, saline, and the cloying smell of latex. It was 82 degrees in the closet, the lack of ventilation making her scrubs cling to her back in damp, itchy patches. She reached into her pocket to secure the vial, but as she turned, a massive silhouette blocked the sliver of light from the door. It was Miller, the head orderly, a man whose uniform was always a size too small for his gym-bulked frame. He didn't speak. He just stepped into the cramped space, the door clicking shut behind him. The sound of the lock engaging was a final, heavy thud in the small room. Nurse Johnson, Miller said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the small space. You're carrying something that doesn't belong to you. I don't know what you're talking about, Miller. Get out of my way. Miller lunged, his hand, as large as a dinner plate, clamped onto Sarah's shoulder, pinning her against a shelf of heavy liter bags of saline. The plastic crinkled and groaned under the pressure. Sarah felt the cold glass of the vial pressing into her leg. If it broke, the evidence was gone, and she might be poisoned by whatever was inside. She didn't scream. She knew no one would come. Instead, she reached blindly to her right, her fingers closing around the cold, hard edge of a stainless steel surgical tray. As Miller reached for her pocket, his breath smelling of peppermint and tobacco, Sarah swung the tray with every ounce of desperate strength she possessed. The edge of the tray caught Miller squarely on the temple. The sound was a sickening, metallic thunk. Miller's eyes rolled back, and his grip slackened. He slumped forward, his massive weight nearly crushing her before he slid to the floor, his head hitting a stack of bedpans with a hollow clatter. Sarah didn't breathe. She scrambled over his legs, her hands shaking so violently she could barely operate the door handle. She burst into the hallway, the sterile white light blinding her for a second. She didn't head for the main exit. She knew the front desk was a trap. She bolted for the service stairs, the heavy concrete walls closing in around her as she took the steps 3 at a time. The echo of her own footsteps sounded like a dozen people chasing her. She reached the ground floor and burst through the heavy fire door into the parking lot. The night air was a shock of cold, damp Connecticut mist. She ran toward her old sedan, her breath coming in ragged, burning gasps. She fumbled with her keys, her eyes darting to the high-rise windows of the hospital, expecting to see Sterling's silver hair and granite jaw silhouetted in a frame. She reached her car and clicked the remote. The lights didn't flash. She looked down and felt her stomach drop into her shoes. All 4 tires were shredded, the rubber hanging in long, intentional ribbons. In the distance, A security siren began its rising, mournful wail. Sarah looked back at the hospital entrance and saw a figure standing in the shadows of the loading dock. It was Mike Davis. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was holding a handheld radio to his mouth, his eyes finely fixed on hers. He had timed it perfectly. He had led her into the closet, and when she escaped, he had made sure she had nowhere to go. Sarah didn't wait for the security team to round the corner. She turned and sprinted toward the perimeter fence, the stolen vial, a heavy, ticking heart in her pocket. The neon sign of the Diner 24 flickered with a rhythmic buzz, casting a jaundiced yellow light over the cracked vinyl booth where Mark Evans sat. The air in the diner smelled of burnt coffee and old grease, a welcome change from the suffocating sterility of the hospital. Mark was already there, his thick glasses sliding down his nose as he obsessively rearranged a dozen sugar packets into a perfect grid on the Formica tabletop. "You're late, Sarah." 12 minutes. I almost left," Mark said, his voice a rapid-fire monotone. He didn't look up. He was busy labeling a sugar packet from the dispenser with a tiny, precise date. "I was being hunted, Mark. Give me a break." Sarah slid into the booth, her body still humming with residual adrenaline. She placed the stolen vial on the table. Mark stopped mid-label. He cleared a space among his units of energy, moving the sugar packets with the care of a diamond merchant. He picked up the vial, holding it against the flickering neon light. He pulled a small, portable testing kit from his messenger bag. A collection of glass slides and chemical strips he treated like holy relics. "It's clear," Mark muttered, "but the surface tension is wrong. It's too heavy." He dropped a single bead of the liquid onto a reactive strip. The paper didn't turn blue or red. It turned a bruised, oily purple. Mark's breath hitched. "Sarah, do you know what this is?" "I'm a nurse, Mark, not a chemist. Tell me." "It's a neuro-paralytic, but it's modified. It doesn't just stop the muscles, it insulates the nerves. It's designed to keep a brain fully conscious while the body is effectively a stone. It's black market tech, Sarah. This stuff isn't even legal for animal testing in the States. If Sterling is pumping this into Vance, he's not trying to heal him. He's trying to keep him from screaming while they do whatever they're doing to his head." The weight of the revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Elias wasn't just a patient. He was a prisoner in his own skin, trapped in a silent, waking nightmare. "I need to go back," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "They're transferring him in 3 hours. A terminal transfer, they called it." "You can't go back there," Mark hissed, leaning across the table. "If they caught you with this, you wouldn't just lose your job. You'd lose your life." Sarah stood up, her jaw set. "I already lost my car and my sense of safety, Mark. If I leave Elias there, I lose the only thing that proves I'm not what my mother said I was. I'm not a drain on the world. I'm the one who knows." She left the diner before Mark could protest, stepping back out into the freezing Connecticut rain. She took a circuitous route back to her apartment, taking 3 different buses and walking through a park to ensure she wasn't being followed. When she finally reached her door, the silence of the hallway felt heavy, oppressive. She swiped her badge at the electronic lock of her apartment building. The light flashed red. She tried again. Red. Her heart began to race. She tried her physical key in the deadbolt, and it turned. But when she stepped inside, the air felt wrong. It smelled of a strange, expensive cologne. Something metallic and sharp. She reached for the light switch, but her hand stopped. Sitting on the small table where she kept her keys was a single black leather glove. It wasn't hers. It was masculine, elegant, and perfectly placed. It was a calling card. Sterling had been here. He hadn't trashed the place. He had simply let her know that her private sanctuary was now his playground. He knew where she slept. He knew where she hid her notebooks. The sense of violation was so intense she felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She backed out of the apartment, leaving the door hanging open. She didn't grab her bag. She didn't grab her coat. She just ran back to the stairwell, her mind screaming. She had to get back to the hospital. It was the only place where the evidence still existed, the only place where she could still save the man who was counting the ceiling tiles to stay sane. As she reached the street, she saw a black sedan idling at the curb. The windows were tinted a deep, impenetrable charcoal. The engine gave a low, predatory growl. Sarah didn't wait. She sprinted toward the bus stop, but the sedan lurched forward, its tires screeching against the wet asphalt. It wasn't a car, it was a weapon. The sedan veered toward her, the chrome bumper missing her hip by inches as she dove behind a concrete planter. The car didn't stop. It circled back, the headlights blinding her as it prepared for another pass. Sarah scrambled to her feet and ran into the dark, skeletal maze of a nearby construction site. The site was a nightmare of jagged rebar and half-poured concrete. The smell of diesel and wet stone was suffocating. She ducked behind a massive yellow excavator, her lungs burning in the frigid air. The sedan prowled the perimeter of the site, its engine a constant, low-frequency threat. Sarah moved through the shadows, her hands scraping against the rough plywood of the temporary walls. She found a narrow gap between two shipping containers and squeezed through, her scrubs tearing on a stray nail. She waited, her heart thumping against the metal wall, until the sound of the sedan faded into the distance. She was alone in the dark, shivering and covered in construction dust. She looked at her hands. They were shaking, but her resolve was hardening. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was a combatant. She spent the next hour navigating the service tunnels that connected the construction site to the hospital's basement. She knew these paths from the late-night shifts, when the elevators were down for maintenance. She reached the hospital's sub-basement, a place of thrumming boilers and hissing steam pipes. She knew where Sterling kept his private records. Not in the digital cloud, which could be tracked, but in the physical office he maintained in the old wing of the hospital. A room that smelled of cedar and old money. She picked the lock with a tension wrench she'd kept in her kit since nursing school. The office was cold, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the high, barred windows. She went straight to the mahogany desk. Behind a false panel in the bottom drawer, she found it. A heavy, leather-bound folder and a high-capacity data drive. She opened the folder and felt the world tilt. These weren't medical charts. They were schematics. Blueprints for a neural link interface. A piece of hardware designed to sit at the base of the skull. Subverted. Sarah stared at the diagrams, her mind working through the technical drawings. She saw the input/output nodes and the way they intersected with the human cerebral cortex. She realized she held the smoking gun. This was the evidence that would destroy Sterling. If she could just get this to the press, to the board, to anyone outside these walls, the nightmare would end. She felt a surge of righteous triumph. She was the smart one. She had outplayed them. She grabbed her phone and began snapping high-resolution photos of every page, her fingers flying. She drafted a quick, anonymous blast to the 3 largest news outlets in the state, attaching the most damning schematics. "Look at what they're doing in room 402, she typed, her heart soaring. "They're turning people into machines." She hit send. She watched the progress bar crawl to 100%. Message sent. She leaned back against the desk, a sob of relief escaping her throat. It was over. The public would see this. The police would swarm the building, and Elias would be saved by the sheer weight of public outcry. She felt a rare moment of pride. She had been essential. She had been memorable. The false positive lasted exactly 60 seconds. Her phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again and again. A frantic, stuttering vibration that wouldn't stop. She looked at the screen. Her anonymous leak hadn't just gone to the news. It had triggered a preset digital tripwire Sterling had installed on the hospital's internal network. But worse, the news outlets had already posted the headline, "Hospital whistleblower reveals secret neural implants in all patients." Sarah's brow furrowed. "All patients?" she whispered. "No, just the ones in the trial." She looked at the comments section beneath the breaking news alert. It was a firestorm of panic. People weren't calling for an investigation into Sterling. They were screaming in terror. Across the country, thousands of patients with legitimate, life-saving medical implants, pacemakers, neurostimulators for epilepsy, insulin pumps, were reading the panicked, distorted report. The crack appeared in the form of a news update. Reports of patients disabling devices nationwide. Sarah's heart stopped. She realized the catastrophic error. By leaking the schematics without the context of the specific trial, she had sparked a localized medical apocalypse. People were literally cutting into their own skin to remove Sterling's trackers. In the next 10 minutes, the first reports of death started rolling in. An elderly man in Ohio, dead from a heart attack after disabling his pacemaker. A teenager in Maine, in status epilepticus after ripping out his stimulator. The truth hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. Sterling hadn't just hidden his work. He had weaponized the public's fear. The data drive in her hand wasn't just a record of his crimes, it was a map of his genius. The biological processors he was creating weren't just for military use. He was using the harvested cognitive energy of patients like Elias to power the very encryption that now locked Sarah out of the hospital's main system. She hadn't saved Elias. She had provided Sterling with the perfect distraction. While the world's media focused on the implant panic she had started, Sterling could finish the transfer in total silence. She had become the villain of her own story, her smart move resulting in a body count that far exceeded anything Sterling had done yet. Her knees went weak, and she slid to the floor of the dark office, the glowing screen of her phone reflecting the carnage she had inadvertently authored. The door to the office creaked open. Dr. Sterling stood there, his silver hair shimmering in the moonlight. He didn't look angry. He looked impressed. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "I couldn't have asked for a better smokescreen. The board is so busy dealing with the lawsuits from the implant panic that they've given me total autonomy over the ICU for the next 48 hours. Shall we go see our patient?" The hospital gala was a swirl of silk, champagne, and the dissonant, upbeat trill of a live jazz quartet. The lobby had been transformed into a garden of artificial lilies and ice sculptures. The cold air smelling of expensive perfume and the faint, metallic tang of the ventilation system. Sarah moved through the crowd like a ghost. She had stolen a lab coat from a laundry cart, the fabric stiff and smelling of industrial bleach. She kept her head down, her eyes tracking the floor as she navigated the sea of tuxedoed donors and laughing socialites. The music was a tactical advantage. It drowned out the heavy thud of her heart and the clicking of her heels on the marble floor. She reached the restricted surgery wing, the glass doors sliding open with a hiss that sounded like a warning. The atmosphere shifted instantly, from the warm, golden glow of the gala to the cold, blue-white glare of the surgical prep area. She pushed into the prep room, her eyes searching for the gurney. But the room wasn't empty. Dr. Sterling was waiting. He stood by the stainless steel sink, his back to her. He was slowly, methodically scrubbing his hands, the thump squish of the soap dispenser the only sound in the room. He didn't turn around when she entered. "You have a persistent quality, Sarah. It's almost admirable," he said, his voice echoing off the tiled walls. "It's over, Robert. I know what the processors are for. I know you're selling them." Sterling turned, his eyes hard and unblinking. He didn't have a weapon, not a traditional one. He held a preloaded syringe, the needle gleaming under the surgical lights. "Progress is a brutal architect, Sarah. It requires us to tear down the sentimental rot to make room for the steel." He moved with surprising speed, his hand clamping onto her throat before she could scream. He pinned her against the edge of the operating table, the cold metal biting into her spine. The syringe hovered inches from her neck. "You're going to sleep now," he whispered. "And when you wake up, you'll be part of the legacy." Sarah's hand flailed, her fingers brushing against a sterile tray of instruments. Her grip closed around the cold, heavy handle of a scalpel. As Sterling leaned in to deliver the injection, she drove the blade into his forearm. Sterling roared, a sound of pure, animalistic rage. He dropped the syringe, his blood, dark and thick, blooming across the white sleeve of his lab coat. He stumbled back, clutching his arm, and his foot hit the emergency override button on the wall. A silent alarm began to pulse. The room was bathed in a rhythmic, nauseating red light. "Help!" Sarah screamed, backing toward the door. "Someone help!" The door burst open, and Linda Warren stepped inside. The head nurse looked immaculate, her uniform starched so stiff it crinkled as she moved. Sarah felt a surge of hope. "Linda, thank God. He's crazy. He's trying to kill the patients." Sarah's voice died in her throat. Linda didn't move toward Sterling to help him. She didn't call for a code. Instead, she reached into her waistband and pulled out a compact, black, semi-automatic pistol. She leveled it at Sarah's chest, her expression as cold and sterile as the room. "Be quiet, Sarah," Linda said, her voice a chilling maternal whisper. "You're making a scene." "Linda, what are you doing?" "I'm protecting my retirement," Linda said, her eyes flicking to the red pulsing light. "Do you have any idea how much it costs to keep a secret this big? I've spent 20 years scrubbing the blood off these floors. I'm not going back to being trash because a girl with a notebook wants to be a hero." Linda stepped toward the intercom on the wall. She pressed the button, her voice shifting instantly into a tone of frantic, professional concern. "Security to surgical prep. We have a code silver. Nurse Sarah Johnson has suffered a psychotic break. She has attacked Dr. Sterling with a scalpel. She is armed and dangerous. Lock down the wing. I repeat, lock down the wing." The heavy steel doors at the end of the hallway slammed shut with a mechanical finality that vibrated through the floor. Sarah was trapped. To the world outside, she was a monster. Inside this room, she was a sacrifice. Sterling stood up, his face pale but his eyes burning with a terrifying clarity. He ignored the blood dripping from his arm. He walked over to the gurney where Elias Vance lay, already prepped, his head shaved and marked with blue surgical ink. "The transfer begins now," Sterling said. "And Sarah, you'll have the best seat in the house." The surgical team worked with the silent, terrifying efficiency of a pit crew. They ignored Sarah, who was now strapped to a gurney of her own, her wrists bound by heavy nylon restraints. She watched, paralyzed, as they wheeled Elias under the massive, multi-armed shadow of the neural link machine. Sterling stood over Elias, his hand steady despite the bandage on his arm. He adjusted his silk tie 3 times. 1, 2, 3. A final ritual before the kill. "Open the port," Sterling commanded. Sarah struggled against the straps, the nylon burning her skin. She looked at the chemical fire suppression canister mounted on the wall just inches from her feet. She remembered the safety training, the specific frequency of the override. She kicked. Not at the straps, but at the canister's release valve, using the heel of her heavy nursing clog. The canister exploded, not with fire, but with a deafening roar of pressurized CO2 and a blinding, waist-high flood of thick, white fire-retardant foam. The room vanished in a blizzard of chemical frost. In the chaos, Sarah's hand found the emergency release lever on her gurney. She rolled off the bed, falling into the cold, stinging foam. She crawled toward Elias, her memory of the room's layout acting as her only guide. Her hand hit a metal tray the reversal agent Mark had identified. She didn't hesitate. She plunged the needle into Elias's thigh, emptying the vial in one desperate surge. "Elias, wake up! You have to move!" She grabbed the handles of his gurney and shoved, the wheels screaming as they cut through the foam. She burst through the swinging doors and into the service elevator, hitting the button for the basement just as Sterling's voice echoed through the fog behind her. Subverted. The elevator doors slid shut. Sarah collapsed against the padded wall, her chest heaving. She looked down at Elias. His eyes were open. The pupils, once fixed and dilated, were now snapping into focus. He was breathing. Real, ragged breaths that weren't timed to the machine. "Elias, can you hear me? It's Sarah. You're safe. We're going to the police." Elias looked at her. A slow, agonizing recognition dawned in his eyes. He tried to speak, his voice a dry, rattling rasp. "Sarah, I'm here, Elias. I've got you. You're free." Elias's hand reached out, his fingers trembling. He touched her face, his skin like ice. Then, his gaze shifted. He looked at the surgical ink on his own hands. He looked at the reflection of his shaved, marked head in the polished metal of the elevator door. He saw the input ports behind his ears, though the crack was the sound of his breathing. It became a high-pitched, rhythmic hitching. "How long?" he whispered. "Elias, don't think about that now." "How long?" he screamed. The sound was a jagged, visceral tear in the silence. The catastrophic reveal wasn't a physical trap. It was the psychological collapse of a man who realized his soul had been used as a battery for years. Elias didn't look grateful. He looked at Sarah with a sudden, localized hatred that made her recoil. "You didn't save me," he hissed, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "You just brought me back to the wreckage. I was counting the stars, Sarah. I was away. Why did you bring me back to this?" Before Sarah could react, Elias lunged. He wasn't a patient anymore. He was a man possessed by the horror of his own existence. He wrapped his hands around Sarah's throat, his strength fueled by a violent, psychotic break. "I can't be here. I can't be this." He shoved her back against the control panel, his weight crushing the air from her lungs. He wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to end the sensation of being alive. He turned toward the elevator doors as they began to open at the basement level. "Elias, stop!" Sarah gasped, reaching for him. But Elias didn't run for the exit. He ran for the open shaft of the unfinished service lift next to them, a 4-story drop into the concrete dark. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look back. He stepped into the void with a silence that was more terrifying than any scream. Sarah stood at the edge of the shaft, the cold wind from below whipping her hair. She had risked everything, her career, her life, the safety of the public. to give this man his voice back. And the moment he had it, he used it to choose death. She had succeeded in her mission, and in doing so, she had destroyed the very person she sought to protect. The sound of sirens grew louder outside. The elevator doors behind her hissed shut. 6 months later. The air in the new clinic was sweet, smelling of fresh paint and the new car air freshener Sarah used to mask the faint, lingering scent of her own memories. It was a small practice in a quiet corner of Connecticut, far from the high-rise glass of the hospital. Sarah sat at her desk, her fingers tracing the edge of her gratitude journal. The book was nearly full now. A knock at the door. It was the mailman, a cheerful man who didn't know her history. He handed her a small, cream-colored envelope. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a typed note. Dear Nurse Johnson, the world is very loud now. Sometimes I miss the counting. But then I remember the sound of your voice in the dark. You were the only thing that was real. Thank you for the choice. E.V. Sarah looked out the window. The flag was waving in the breeze, a steady, rhythmic motion. She realized the note wasn't from the Elias she had lost in the shaft. It was from the legacy of the truth she had uncovered. The FBI had seized the servers. Sterling was in a federal cell. Linda was gone. She picked up her pen. She didn't write about the trauma or the blood. She wrote the date, the time, and the words from the note. Thank you for the choice. She closed the book, her thumb resting on the cover. She was Sarah Johnson. She was the one who knew. And for the first time in her life, that was enough.